to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life.
When we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important.
It's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. You know, we all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
You're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Christian here, aka the Atlantean Alchemist, with
Viv, aka Lunar Faery Witch, and
today we have our special guest.
Imani, aka Empress of Horror.
Imani is joining us today on our topic as we talk about
Working, worshiping, and divine devotion.
All right, so I'm going to start us off talking about the differences of working with spirits versus devotion. So, the one thing I do kind of notice when it comes to both working with a spirit and devotion, either way, there is some sort of integration that goes on where you kind of begin to embody those archetypes or by the path working with that spirit, even if it's temporary or devotional. However, I notice with devotion, it's more intense. They may put you through trials, and they will often put you through the biggest lessons that are in relation to that spirit. So I think it's a little bit more of a deeper integral connection. I also want to say that when it comes to the difference between the two is that in devotion, it's more of a life path commitment. You're committing yourself to not only receiving their gnosis, but acting it out. So it's about being of service, not only to that entity, but to the larger population. This may even go into priesthood working for some people, where it goes even further. And what are your thoughts, Mani?
Basically everything that you just said. Yeah, you basically summarized all of my thoughts just straight out from my head.
Two minds think alike. I did also want to cover and talk about how, like, in devotion, there's usually involving some sort of like disciplines. So whether that's constant prayer or whether that's very specific practices, you tend to have some sort of repetitious practice with that spirit. When you're working with this spirit, it's a lot more inconsistent, and it's usually for one specific goal in mind. Like, for example, I've worked with Aphrodite solely for like self-love, and I've done workshops with just working with the aspects of Aphrodite and Venus. And that was it. I haven't worked with her pretty much since. And it may just be that. Of course, there's offerings and stuff like that at the end of the workings. But I'm going to give this to Viv. What are your thoughts, Viv?
it's funny because I consider myself like a devotee to Aphrodite. So we come from like those different perspectives, which is really cool. So I can definitely relate to the idea of sort of embodying the deity that you're devoted to over a long period of time. So for me with Aphrodite, I can sort of feel a more self-embodied, self-love sort of approach to myself versus before I started working with her, I used to have a lot of issues with like how I viewed myself and my self-confidence and stuff like that, and just the way I view myself, but also the way I view others and feel for others has shifted 100%. And the way I love others as well as myself has completely shifted. And I could just really feel myself starting to embody that energy. Same with Lilith, with sort of embodying that more, I guess, Lilithian. Is that even a word? It's probably not a word, but you know what I mean. Anyone who works with Lilith understands where working with her just completely shifts the way, like the dynamic within which you deal with people, but also the way you view yourself. And so it's definitely important to keep in mind that working with a deity for a long period of time is most likely going to just change you as a person. For me, it's always been for the better, and I'm grateful for that. And yes, also touching upon the differences between working with a deity and then having devotion towards them. I completely agree with everything Christian was saying, where working with them tends to be more inconsistent and towards a certain cause, whereas devotion is going to be more about like a relationship between you two and them teaching you all these lessons and you beginning to embody these aspects of them. Although I do also personally find that if you do work with a spirit, sometimes you do go a little beyond and you start to embody some of their aspects, but that's going to depend on how close you get to them and how much you work with them. So that really depends, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's funny. As you're bringing that up, I was reminded of a tweet that I saw not too long ago where it was basically a tweet talking about how you don't just solely embody the divine attributes of the gods or the spirits that you work with, you also embody their problems. And that was something that was coming up too, which I find kind of interesting. I think at least the one I noticed the most is probably with Odin. When I work with Odin, or the problems that I notice that I end up embodying with him is that very strong hermit energy. Like there'll be like seasons where like all your contacts just disappear and you're left alone to just contemplate, and you're just kind of going through like a dark night of the soul. And it's like, for me, it's every spring. It's really weird. Or that tends to be kind of like the point that has come up a few years in the past. And then with Freya, I think it's a huge thing of like working through grief. There's this really big thing about grief, and like when we look at the mythology of her in like relation to like her crying tears of amber, or in some cases gold, that kind of plays into it as well. It's kind of interesting. Have you noticed anything, Amani?
With you or myself?
Yeah, yourself. Like any problems you think you've embodied.
Let me think. Well, I think back to when I was working with Lucifer. Now, because I was so close to the situation, you probably have like a better like outside perspective. So like put in your 2 cents. But in like the almost 4 years I was working with him, I actually mentioned this to you not too long ago. I feel like at some point, maybe around like the 6 month, 7 month, definitely by the end of year one, I had sort of like moved away from how I was pre-working with him energetically wise and just how I behaved to we were two peas in a pod. Like even energy wise, like we were matching. But actually, now I think about it, moving from working with him to a not necessarily with my knowledge completely devotional relationship with Loki, I've noticed that Loki's had to pull me out of this very planning stickler sort of mentality and just kind of like roll with shit because I've noticed lately especially when he wants my attention, I'll like be doing something, getting ready, and then all of a sudden something will happen where like I'm clumsy with something and something will happen I literally watch it happening in front of my eyes. It's almost like it happens in slow motion, how something will just tumble out and then land perfectly or what so have you. And I'm just sitting here like, okay, all right. It's like stuff like that. But
so like to sum it up, you would say that like the aspects that you embodied from Lucifer is that you kind of going over your head with the planning and like the process, like very like King of Swords kind of energy.
Yeah, very much. But basically it was his way or the highway, but there was no highway. So it was only his way. And I ended up embodying that. Very, very true. It's like, if I say it, you do it. Don't ask me. Don't do all of these things. Do what I say. And then I ended up, like, very much, if he said jump, I would just say, how high? And then Loki's over here just being like, if I say go do this and that, yeah, do it. But at the same time, if I start throwing curveballs, you better know how to duck.
Yeah, I think it's actually been a really good thing for you then.
Yeah.
What about you, Viv? What problems have you embodied?
I love the my way or the highway thing, but there's no highway. So let me think. I feel like since I started working with Lilith, I got much more assertive, but at the same time, too much to the point where I have to consciously pull myself out of conflict or else I will fight someone. And that's something I've had to work on, that I've had to sort of temper and ground myself and be like, I don't need to be fighting this person or arguing this person right now. And I've been starting to get better about it, but it's a process. So that's been interesting. I love how she's made me more assertive and confident, but at the same time, it's a little bit overkill sometimes. And so, that's kind of part of her that I embodied that is kind of a little bit overkill that I need to work on. As for my other deities, with Aphrodite, I'm not quite so sure. I think that one thing that perhaps might have rubbed off on me, I'm not sure if this is from her or if this is just me as a person, but jealousy, not towards like people who look good or whatever, because I don't care if you look good, good for you. But like in relationships, jealousy. I don't know if this rubbed off on me from Aphrodite, but I definitely have noticed it a little bit more. And there may or may not be a correlation. I know correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it is an interesting thing I've noticed. And I feel like it would make sense with more intensely working with Aphrodite over the past few months or whatever. And then with Cernunnos, honestly, I haven't noticed myself embodying problems in terms of Cernunnos unless you count sort of more, I guess, even more empathy in terms of nature, and just like every time I see human beings being destructive, it physically pains me because, Cernunnos really deals with the wild and also like trophy hunting and stuff like that. Although I've always felt that, but I feel like that's sort of been amplified for Cernunnos. So I guess if that counts, that as well.
I love the correlation doesn't equal causation. I hear it all the time as a psych major, and I'm just like, that's the quote that I need on my grave.
Imagine if like our gravestones were just correlation doesn't equal causation. That's our last words.
That'd be very interesting for someone to stumble upon and just be like, what?
Like just a whole graveyard of correlation does not equal causation. Okay, let me try. So I did want to talk about how to improve working with spirits and devotion. Things that I've done to improve my relationships with them is to always talk to them daily, whether it's in prayer. Sometimes you can just do traditional prayers if you don't want to plan something out and it's just a quick little thing. But I feel like you really build bonds with them when you talk to them. Like even if it's just your problems, I don't like talk about all my problems all the time because I feel like it's annoying. They're not your therapist. So you want to like be like, hey, I achieved this today. Or well, that's still kind of like therapy. But in the sense that like if you were talking to a friend, sometimes they do respond back to your stories, especially if they feel very personal about it, or they feel like they have some sort of similar experience that they have had or something that they kind of impart on you. That's one thing that's helped me tremendously with relationships with my spirits. Now, I work with a lot of spirits, way too many to have so many personable bonds with. So it kind of depends. So like I'll try and do it with my main primary spirits. So that would be like Athena, Freya, Odin, and Apollo. As for the other spirits and other gods and deities, if I'm in a current path working with them, I try and have a conversation with them about like what I'm experiencing or what I'm going through with their path working. So I relate it to the work that I'm doing with them. That way you're building a bond with them. And the thing is that when you have a lot of spirits, it's also best to address them all at once. So I actually created like a invoking like prayer to kind of speak to all of them at once. And sometimes if you're like really busy, like sometimes I'll go and I'll blow a kiss to my altar, be like, good morning. It's something simple like that. helps out tremendously. At least that's one thing that's really helped me. And one other thing I would say is meditation. If you could do daily meditation, better. But I'm not always constantly meditating with my deities. Like, I'll do specific things based off of what I need. Usually I end up meditating to focus on like physical healing or kind of restoring my vitality when I know I'm kind of running myself dry. That has helped me personally. What about you, Imani?
Yes, meditation's a important one for many reasons. There's a lot of things that meditation is good for. I feel like I'm always having to remind myself to meditate and like find the time to do that, especially like in depth. And I agree. I'm usually, when it comes to meditation, I'll like call like my guides and my deities like in, but I won't necessarily be meditating on or with them. Almost, I'll usually be meditating on like other stuff, as you said, to like, improve psychic perception, or, your energy system and grounding and so on and so on.
Okay, so to like work with you, but like in a indirect way.
Yeah, and then if they decide that they want to like pop in and then kind of like show me something like completely like off the wall, out for left field, like that would be cool. A really cool example of that was when I was doing a chakra meditation one time last year, and this is the first time that I actually saw Loki. Was not expecting him to show up whatsoever. I was just minding my own business, got around to like my third eye or so, and then I started seeing this purple, as is probably normal. And then I saw like my room, I saw what looked like a goblin, and I was just kind of like, okay. And then when I saw I wasn't afraid, then he, revealed himself. And so I was like, anyways, so they do that. And other ways to improve when working with spirits: treat them like people. Don't treat them like tools. You will have a bad time if you do that. You won't have a fulfilling relationship with them in all of the different facets that you can have it with. So, give them offerings, food offerings that they like, or that they suddenly decide that they want and they tell you that they want, if you can. There's various ways on how that is done. Non-physical offerings, like the energy of something such as food or music, reading to them, be it a book or poetry, music, as you said, dancing's another really good one. Just walking with them in your day to day and really connecting with their energy, reading and like their myths and whatnot. I find what also helps me is connecting and like reading the experiences of others who work or worship that same deity that you're like trying to like connect to, and like find that like common ground. Because sometimes you'll just be doing just random things or like reading something that someone else said in their experiences with them, and they will send you messages through that little like anecdote that someone else had, just right under your door, like slide it right under.
I definitely agree with that. And I could totally relate, Imani, when you said like in meditation, they'll just like come in sometimes. I had that with Cornunos yesterday, and he actually gave me like an important message. I was like, oh, that explains everything that's going on right now. And I was like, thank you. I finally know what's happening. And I can tell you guys what it is, but I don't really want to reveal it in public. Not that it's anything crazy, but But in terms of improving your relationship with spirits, definitely agree with what both of you said. In terms of talking to them, one thing I do is I got a prayer cord for demonolatry, and I kind of go over each bead for the 9 demonic divine, and for each one I kind of say something to them, I talk to them, or I thank them. Maybe I just say their end, just sort of, or just even just connect to each demon for each bead. I don't do this every day, although I definitely should, but it takes time. So that's something I do sometimes. One thing I love to do for my deities is write them poetry. I wrote one for Cernunnos that I placed on his altar that I read to him sometimes. I'll light him some incense and I'll read the poem that I wrote for him, especially if they don't really have previously written like hymns. Like to Aphrodite, there's a hymn to Aphrodite that I read to her, but Cernunnos doesn't really have that. It's mainly poetry written by different devotees, and I thought I'd write one for him. And another thing that I thought of when Imani mentioned like dancing and music and stuff is that especially if you work with, let's say you work with a divine feminine sort of deity like Aphrodite, Lilith, there's so many others, Venus, Babylon, you could always do a dance to honor them. I know a lot of belly dancers who, some of them, they kind of do it to like honor as a spiritual thing, to honor like their divine feminine, but you could also do it to honor like a goddess. And I don't see why you couldn't do it for like divine masculine either, but I do find that I tend to connect that to those types of deities. And I know Gabby Herstick did like a really beautiful performance for Babylon recently that I really loved. So something like that, I think that was really beautiful to watch. And stuff like that, just art, I feel like is a good offering for a lot of the gods. And that also includes physical art like painting. I've painted stuff for my gods and they really liked it. Sometimes I paint like glass candles, I paint on it for them. And it's, then I light it in their honor. And it takes a lot of time. So it's like a good offering for them because you're giving sort of your time and your energy into creating this piece of art for them, which I think is really cool. And definitely that I feel like there's sort of this thing with beginners where they think offerings have to be food or drink. I know I sort of did this as a beginner where I was like, offering, I made cupcakes, I'll give you a cupcake. And it's like, there's so much more you can do than that. You can light them incense, you can pray to them, you can dance for them, you can make art for them. There's so many things you can do to get close to them. And yeah, I think that's all my thoughts on that for now.
I had another idea when it came to offerings. Watching movies is a really good one, or just watching shows in general, especially ones that like you feel like they probably would like, that y'all probably like together, because like sometimes they'd be picky, which fair enough. Another one that came to mind, especially with music, is that like for example with me and Loki, like lately he's really gotten into Hylung and has been wanting to like have me basically meditate on their music with him, specifically Gal Gadot. Like there's a section in Gal Gadot specifically that's like a back and forth with like the male and female vocalists, and we'll just kind of like be going back and forth in like a trance thing. You can do that. That's cute. Incense, as you said, candles are another one. Like I just yesterday just a whole candle for him because he did not like any of the options that I gave him from going through a bunch of Etsy and Amazon pages. So he was like, make me one. And I was like, okay, there goes some of my money from my bank account. Just live with the intention of living with them as much as possible, even if you don't necessarily feel them there. A lot of times they be hiding their energy. They be there. They know what's up. Like honestly, half the time you don't even really kind of tell them what happened. They will know because they were there. They just got like little eyes on you.
Exactly. They're just like lurking in the background a lot of the time. As you were saying that, one more thing I did think of was doing things for other people. So I just read the book, The Magic of Marie Laveau. And, even though I'm not a voodoo practitioner, I found it really inspiring how she contributed to her community and helped other people, and just what an amazing impact she had. And the book also talked about, acts of love towards your community as a form of an offering and as devotion. And I think that's a really good thing as well for And even you can even donate in terms of like what your deity deals with. So like you can donate to saving the wolves. I don't know, you can help people in your community. Like there's things you can do as an acts of service that I think are really good offerings too.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny because when I wrote out the information that I have on a bunch of angels that I work with, largely the services or like the offerings that angels really want is acts of service. They don't really want objects other than like frankincense and myrrh seems to be a really good common one. Like for example, Raphael wants you to usually build your healing abilities and capabilities and give that to other people. They're always just about like justice and order and like giving back to communities and service. So I found that interesting as like offerings. And one thing that did come to mind is if you don't have the financial resources to spend like on a bunch of candles and stuff like that, there's also the idea of sacred adornment where very objects that you wear are dedicated to those deities, like in jewelry, maybe even tattoos. Well, that does cost money, but I mean in the sense that it's not expendable, it's not temporary, it's permanent, and you could interchange it. So like for example, I'm wearing my prayer beads to Apollo right now and my devotional ring to him as well. And I change it up every now and then. I'll wear something dedicated to Freya or Athena, depending on the kind of energies that I want to embody for the day. Like today, I did my makeup all golden. So now we're wearing everything solar. That's kind of what's come up with me. I do love to do incense offerings. Like I did mention though before in the previous episode, you may not be able to do incense offerings. So you may even consider like mist sprays, things like that. Like I have a lavender mist spray that I use to cleanse my room. I use that. I use Florida water, things that have a scent but don't permeate beyond your room if you're living with others that are maybe sensitive to smells. That's what comes to mind. I did want to expand on the topic about talking about whether it's important to have a relationship already with a spirit or a deity or to not and like start off like you just met them and you're already asking and petitioning them for specific things. Did you want to start on that, Viv?
Yeah, sure. Now, I can kind of see why people say that you can petition spirits without having an extensive relationship beforehand. Now, I don't think you need like years of a relationship with them. I don't think they have to be this huge thing in your life that, yeah, I don't think you have to be devoted to them to petition them, but I also think you should at least converse with them a few times beforehand and build some sort of relationship, just like I think Imani said earlier, treat them like a person, not a tool. And I think that's a really good thing to go by, because I do find it a little bit iffy when you've never spoken to the spirit, you've never gotten to know their energy, and you've never really told them who you are and just let them get to know you before you start asking them for things. So I do think that it's just more polite in a way, whether it's a spirit in a graveyard or a deity or a demon or an angel. I think it's best to just sort of talk to them like you would with a person, right? You wouldn't randomly go up to someone in the street and be like, "Hey, can you buy me lunch?" Because that's just not how it works. You're going to get to know them, you're going to build even just a few conversations beforehand, I think is a good thing to do before you start petitioning spirits.
That's interesting. It makes me think of I think I gave this example before. If you ask your neighbor for sugar, it's more likely that they're going to give it to you if you have a relationship with them than not. But I also think about the idea of like where it might be okay, where like, for example, if let's say you're going through a horrible experience that's related to a theme that that spirit governs and they personally feel involved in that cause, they may help you even if you don't have a relationship with them. So for example, if you're dealing with some sort of injustice and you call on Nemesis, she may feel personally involved or attached to that problem that you're having and will help you out. even if it's not necessarily that you have a relationship with her. And then that relationship can start from that moment if you choose to. But I think that's the one thing I could think of that where a stranger could actually help in dire need, where they feel, if something's happening out in public, you're more inclined to help someone you feel like it relates to you personally.
Agreed. Something that keeps coming to mind. So one of them is telling me to mention this, is that if you're, I can't think of anybody right now, so we're just gonna say just some random deity or spirit or what have you. If you're petitioning one of them to help in some sort of spell that's for a specific reason, or you want or need X or Y thing, and they govern in the field that's relating to that, and they're good at it. You're petitioning them, but you've also never spoken to them before, and you don't really know how they are, say from other people's anecdotes or whatever, and like the little that you might be able to find online, because let's be honest, a lot of them have very little written down. How it's going to be is that it's probably, and it's always a toss-up on whether they personally feel invested in that particular thing, like you said, Christian, or not. Let's say they aren't feeling particularly emotionally invested, then it's probably going to be a business sort of relationship. So you're going to get that from them. But with that being said, you can't just go up to them and be like, hey, can you do this thing for me? Great. That's not going to fly. It's very much an equivalent exchange sort of deal. If you're like, oh, can you do this for me? You probably should be offering them things, and I say things in plural because it's probably going to be, they're probably going to ask for a lot, especially if it's a big thing. That's going to be about the equivalent sort of energy that they would have to expel or be worth it to them. Not bribing, mind you. Don't do that. Don't do that. Just, be like, hey, I need some help in this baneful work, try to get this guy out of my life. Preferably, maybe still alive. Let's not get too harsh here. Don't really want anything on anybody's records. That'll be dodgy. But something like that requires a lot of energy, especially if they're doing a lot of the legwork and you're doing about a bit, because maybe you're like somewhat in the closet still, you can buy a whole lot of things. So you're going to probably so they're probably going to ask you a tiny bit of a laundry list of offerings in various forms, such as they probably want you to make a candle for them. They probably want an incense offering. They probably want some foods offerings. And if you're old enough, maybe some liquor, maybe some nice liquor if they're really feeling it. Try to put your foot down on a bit of things, because honestly, with a chunk of spirits, not all, but a chunk, if they can get one up on you, they will try to get one up on you. But, there's a bit of an equivalent exchange, and they, especially if it's the first time and you're asking for like a really big working, they're going to ask for interest. Be mindful of that, because they may not take that interest when you're giving the offerings. They may take that interest like a month from when everything completes. That interest may end up being the fact that they end up working with you later and they put you through immediate boot camp. And I say boot camp specifically because they might end up wanting you to do a certain type of like divination that you have no idea how to do, and it's incredibly complicated, and they're going to be like, well, today's the day that you learn.
So the example that comes to mind when you say that is like, let's say you went up to a stranger, you're just like, I'm gonna buy you lunch if you build me a house. And then the stranger builds the house and it's just like, you know what? I worked a lot harder than just a lunch. You need to buy me dinner, dessert, and we're going to go to a buffet. Like, that's the kind of energy that happens with spirit exchanges. And I think, too, we emphasize so much on offerings, but that itself is not always necessarily builder of bonds by itself. You just giving something to someone like, hey, here's $20. I want you to, make quadruple that and give me $80 in return. That doesn't work like that. Like, it's not necessarily building a bond just because you give something to someone else. There has to be this communication. And that's if you're really looking towards that. I think that when you approach someone with respect and kindness and you explain something to someone instead of just being like, hey, this is what I want, I need it now, here's like, your payment. If you approach it like that, you're not going to get as many good results. When you take the time to explain your situation, like, hey, so I'm experiencing X, Y, and Z. I could really use your help because I know this X, Y, and Z about you. Can you please give me a little bit of your expertise or your advice or counsel on this? I'm willing to give you this in return, just for a little bit of your time. If you approach it like that versus like demand on their time and their energy with just like a little payment for a lot more in return, it's just not going to fly.
Yeah, and you mentioned a really good point there just now. Time. Out of any offering that you can give them, if they see some sort of potential in you, just straight like, even honestly, even if you only ask them for like a little working and you may not have talked to them before, you may have just a little bit. If they see like an inkling of, oh, I can work with this with you specifically, they will. The best way I can put it is that they almost kind of see you as a diamond in the rough, and then they will try to mold you how they want. And the greatest offering that will be given to them through that will be your time, because our time is finite, theirs is not. That's not to say that they want your soul, because they don't want that. But time, the energy of time in the relationship given is very valuable because we value it.
That's a really good point. That's such a good point. Time is like the greatest offering as a human being because we're mortal on this earth, and we're basically making a sacrifice for this spirit. And I fully agree with what both of you said there. Like sometimes they might emphasize with your situation. I sort of had that with Belial, although I did have a relationship with him before I asked him for something. It wasn't super intense, as in like I would pray to him as part of the demonic divine, but he really emphasized with my situation. But like Imani talked about, he wanted offerings, he wanted incense, he wanted a candle, he wanted my time, right? He really valued my time and the fact that I put that into making something for him and just giving back. And, like Christian was saying, if you say, build me a house, I'll get you a sandwich, and then they build the house and they're like, actually, I think the house is worth a little bit more than a sandwich. Yeah, be prepared for that, because a lot of the time, it's just like for example, if you're a tarot reader and someone randomly messages you like, give me a tarot reading for free, you're probably not going to go along with that unless you've stated that you give tarot readings for free. You're probably not going to go along with that. And it's the same with spirit. So it's really important to have the same amount of respect for a spirit that you would to, for example, a tarot reader or someone offering services, because if a spirit is offering you a service, you shouldn't expect it for free just because they're a spirit, because that's not like, it's not the most respectful to just go up to a spirit and demand something, just like you wouldn't do that to a human being. Hopefully you wouldn't do that. If you would, you might want to reevaluate like how you're living your life, but hopefully you're not doing that.
Agreed.
I did want to go over a little bit more on offerings and like talking about food offerings specifically. When we think about food offerings, or at least how it's been explained to me, is that when you make an offering of like food or drink or something that is consumable, it's explained to me that there's an etheric copy, or like the energetic essence of the item is consumed, and then what's left is like the husk, the physical form of the consumable item. So that could be food or drink. At least that's how it's been explained to me. So when you're considering and giving offerings of food and drink, it can come off as that. Usually I'd like to wait like 24 hours, because that gives them enough time for them to, savor it however long. And you kind of can tell by looking at the item, it looks like it'll be lifeless in a sense. It's like they just really drink the shit out of that. And sometimes I notice that with herbs too, when you make herbal offerings, which I do a lot with Freya, she just eats it. They're just gone in like a day. And then like I'll give offerings to, like, for example, Dantelion, and I notice he savors it. He takes his time with the herbs. He doesn't just take it all in at once. So it's important to just kind of get a good intuitive feel of what's going on with the offerings. And sometimes those spirits may ask you to consume those offerings to be more in alignment with their energies, because it does carry an aspect of their energy. Like sometimes, like with Belial or Odin, they may ask you to drink the alcohol that you provided them with, because this is an access way or a portal to their energy to connect more deeply with yours. I particularly see this with Odin with mead, especially with his associations to like the mead of poetry and wisdom. And you could even make that a ritual, like dedicate a mead to Odin or to, depending on the situation, whatever deity or spirit. And then you dedicating that drink to them and then drinking it is the offering itself, because it's embodied with their own spiritual essence. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Now, for me, at least, because let's say you only have so much money coming in, maybe you are a bit in the closet or fully in the closet, and you are not living alone, and you're a bit of a dependent on whoever else that you're living with, and or they are not so accepting of your beliefs and your practice. You probably don't want to leave a whole Thanksgiving plate out on your countertop in your room, especially if you live anywhere like in an old house where the insulation is particularly bad, and by the time that you wake up from that afternoon nap, ants have arrived, or worse, or your pets. Please don't let your dog eat cooked chicken bones. Just throwing that out there. That would be bad. So what I would do usually, because this is how I do like food offerings, either I'm eating, like in the kitchen, and I will offer, the enjoyment of the food and the essence of that moment to them. Or if it's like a little thing, like maybe some wine, and actually leave it on my altar for like a little bit, I'll leave it there for maybe like an hour or so, maybe even less. But you always want to either get told from them, be that clairaudiently, through a feeling, and then confirm it with divination that they told you that you can have it. Don't just go and take it, because they may not be done with it. That's specifically for food, though. If it's like for incense, like you'll know, because obviously like it's not finished burning. If it's, say, like it's an incense brand that's like particularly, as soon as you burn it, 5 minutes later, you are gasping for oxygen in your room, even with the door closed. Maybe open a window. If you can't open the window, just tell them, hey, I know you're really enjoying this. We're gonna have to mince this brand though. I cannot breathe. Put it out. Maybe keep their candle on, maybe not, maybe offer them something else. Another really good one that you could just leave out daily that for the most part won't attract most things is water. Just like a little thing of water. That's really nice.
Yeah, I've heard about like making offerings with like moon water. Like I recently did that with Athena with the previous full moon, because she has this like fancy onyx chalice that I got for her. I just filled it with moon water and a little bit of black salt to purify it.
Oh, another thing that's really good when it comes to offerings is just things. So things that they like. So this doesn't have to be expensive, mind you. Some gods, like the first one that's coming to mind is like Hermes. I've seen people that have offered him like strawberries, coins, because he deals with like money.
Monster energy drinks.
Monster. I've seen a couple people that have offered Loki like full-on McDonald's meals with like the McDonald's Sprite, candy, be mindful of the sugar, perfume, just random objects, leaves, bones. divination sets, like like a dedicated like tarot or like rune set, a statue that you buy. That could be expensive though. Making them like a little like oil thing or anything really. The leaves, flowers, as you said, herbs, a whole host of things.
I even have an essential oil kind of like tincture for Persephone that I have dedicated to her, and I have certain oils that are cold brewing for specific deities. Like I have one for Apollo that's brewing for like consecrating my divination tools. So I like to do that as well. That's been really fun for me. What about you, Viv?
One thing I did is I got these really cute cork bottles and I made herbal blends for each of my deities for their altar. And then I'll just like offer some of it to them. Or you could even burn it as incense on a charcoal tablet if the herbs are safe to burn. And I have like I made like a cute little label with their name on it and everything. My favorite one is Carnunos because his smells like orange and it's so nice. And actually, my favorite deity altar is his altar because I gather stuff from outside and I put it on his altar for him. So I think it's called tumbleweed. I found some tumbleweed that's like on a stick that's perfect. I just like put it there. I think that's what it's called. I hope I'm not talking about something completely different that's like toxic or something. Anyway, juniper, the herbal blend for him, some leaves, and you can even put fresh flowers, but switch them out so they don't mold. And one thing I wanted to touch upon as well as ancestors, with ancestor offerings, you could definitely offer them like the conventional like food and drinks and stuff. But I also wanted to touch upon traditional foods and traditional drinks. So, for example, for me, maybe I'll give my Turkish side like Turkish coffee. I'll make some, I'll give myself some and them a cup. And maybe I'll give my other side of the family some Yorkshire tea or something. I don't know. But that's really nice. And I also think that just making traditional food from your culture, just making it and learning how to make it and spending your time on that, it could be an offering to them as well because you're connecting with what the types of food they would make and the foods they would eat, and you're putting your time into learning that and perfecting that skill and creating that if you enjoy cooking. So that's one thing I would do for ancestors, and because I've been getting a little more into that lately. And yeah, definitely what you guys talked about as well. I'm trying to think if I have any other points I wanted to bring up. Making oils for them, that's really fun. You could even do like what I did with the herbal blends and add some of the herbs from the blend into the oil blend that you're making, and then blend in some other stuff and use it for their candles and to anoint yourself with their energy and stuff like that. And yeah, I think those are all really good things that you can do.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of, so I have a little area in my altar where I do ancestral offerings. I've started putting aguardiente, which is sort of like this alcohol with this anse seed kind of thing going on for my ancestors because of my Hispanic heritage. So that's something that I've been doing as well, or I'm getting more into incorporating certain things into my practice that are from my culture. I did want to start going into talking about spirit pacts. So with spirit packs, this is something that's not for everyone, and not every entity will require it because you can usually work on something pretty well and specific if you're working just with them for a specific goal. But what a pact essentially is it's an agreement between you and that entity on a very specific goal with a time limit usually to achieve something. So usually you'll see the concept of spirit pacts with the demonic divine, but it can be done with other spirits. It's not as common, but I've seen it before as well. So, for example, if you're asking Belial for financial wealth, you may want to forge a pact with him. And let's say you need $100 or so by the end of the month, additionally for your rent or something like that. Now, I normally would not recommend doing a pact with like a time limit that close up. But if you got some time in between and you can call on some spiritual support, that's always great to do. So you would set the time. You'd be like, okay, so I need this before the end of the month. These $100, what would you like in return? They'll tell you what they'll want in return. The better the relationship you have with the spirit, the less likely they're going to ask for something big. So, like for example, with me and my bond with Dantelion, all he really wanted from me was candle to be lit to him once a week and just take time out to connect with him. That's all he requested from me with my pact with him. And with Bilal, he tends to be more materialistic, so he may ask for alcohol, he may ask for body fluids, because these are things that are very connected to his aspects. Like he's very, very big about indulgence, and that may take in the form of offerings. And sometimes I've seen offerings done where like things people that like they normally wouldn't do, which don't ever like feel like you have to be backed into a corner to like appease the spirit. You don't always have to do something that's outside your comfort zone. But like I've seen people who like have never smoked a day in their life, they'll like blow a cigar onto the statue or the vessel of the spirit as an offering because it was requested. And if that's within your comfort zone, you can. But like those are little things that I've seen. But pacts are basically just contracts towards a specific goal, usually with a deadline or to become or draw in something. What do you think, Imani?
Yeah, when I think of pacts, like spirit pacts, I think of it in a very business sort of sense. As you said, usually they won't ask anything completely untoward, but if they do, put your foot down. You can say no for a lot of things. I think that's it.
And what's your takes on it, Viv?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like y'all covered all my sort of thoughts on spirit packs. I also know S. Connolly wrote a book on it, so if y'all want to learn about spirit packs from a demonolators or demonolatry perspective, then that might be worth checking out. I feel like I talk about her work in like every single podcast episode, every single video, every single live stream, but it's just so good. Anyway, but yeah, more of like a working, I guess you could say, like, you know, business relationship. And they definitely have a lot of value. Another book I'd recommend in terms of that is Goetia Pathworking by Corwin Hargrove. Christian, I think when we had our first collab on, I don't know if it was on my YouTube channel or yours, but I remember you mentioned that book. I think it was on mine. And it's really good. And that one's good in terms of path working, but also like making pacts for a specific goal with certain spirits. And yeah, those are two resources I definitely recommend.
Yeah, and I just got the book on S. Connolly with spirit packs. I like it because it gives really good templates. Like even if it's not necessarily with demons, like just the structure of it is really, really good. And that's now how I use my packs. But yeah, and also that book, it definitely was one of the ones that I recommended. It's awesome. So for those of you who are listening in, check it out. But we're going to wrap this up, guys. We will see you guys in the next episode. I hope that this has enlightened you about how to build stronger bonds with your spirit allies, be they God, be they demon, angel, and everything else in between. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You could find both me and Viv on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube under Lunar Faery Witch and the Atlantean Alchemist. And you can find Imani on Twitter as Empress of Horror. So I will tune in with you guys in the next episode.